I told y'all Eric Jones is going to get himself a win this year. Now, I didn't think it was going to be Daytona in July, but he got it done. He did it. He's the winner. How's it going, everybody? Welcome once again to a very jam-packed Out of the Groove. So much to talk about this weekend's race. After last weekend's historically awesome, nail-biting finish at Chicagoland, I really didn't think there was anything that Daytona, even Daytona, as crazy as this track is, I didn't think there was anything it could do to possibly top it. And now, of course, the finish this weekend may not be objectively quite as exciting or thrilling as we saw at Chicagoland, but at least for me, and for a lot of longtime fans of the sport, I think it was a breath of fresh air. But we'll talk about the finish and the winner later in the episode. I think it's fair to start with the guy that probably was talked about the most last night, and that's Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Saturday night's race had a lot of big wrecks, even for Daytona standards. And unfortunately, it seemed like Ricky Stenhouse Jr. found himself in the middle of several of them. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., he's won at Daytona before. He won 2 restrictor plate races just last season, so we know he's a decent plate racer. We know Roush has always given their drivers some really top-notch restrictor plate cars. So of course, Stenhouse for most of the race was up near the front, top 2 or 3, leading laps. In fact, he won Stage 1 and Stage 2, despite the drama that he got himself into. If you watched the race, you've seen the wrecks and the incidents he was a part of. I just want to give you my opinion on them because I think people were a little bit unfair, honestly, to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. And not just fans this time. I think a lot of announcers and broadcasters doing the NBC broadcast were kind of unfair to him. Let's talk about the first incident of the night. Let's talk about the first big wreck. Honestly, probably the biggest wreck of the night. It happened early on in stage number 2 when Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Brad Keselowski had a big run on the bottom going into turn 3. William Byron, who was leading the race, came down pretty late, put an aggressive block on Keselowski, who then had to lift, got hit pretty hard from behind by Ricky Stenhouse Jr., which spun him up into other cars, and that took off like a 20-car wreck. People are mad at Stenhouse for pushing so aggressively so early, although Brad Keselowski, who was at the very beginning of the incident, blamed William Byron more than anything for making a late aggressive block. And had that been the only big incident of the night, I think most people would have just chalked that up to it being a racing deal. A little bit of blame on Byron, a little bit on Stenhouse, maybe a little on Keselowski. You know, it's just kind of a racing deal. You know, it was a late block, car stacked up and got hit in the wrong way. It's just kind of is what it is. Now, it was sucky because it did take out a lot of really good cars early on, including the entire Penske fleet. Chase Elliott was knocked out right there. You had a lot of cars get damaged. Suarez was knocked out. There's tons of cars that suffered damage in this wreck, about half the field. So it was a major incident, had a lot of people looking for someone to blame, and I think unfortunately a lot of that blame fell on Stenhouse, and at least as far as this one incident is concerned, I don't really think Stenhouse deserves much of the blame at all, honestly. I mean, he and Keselowski had a lane open, and they were pushing hard. They weren't locking bumpers, and Stenhouse really didn't hit Keselowski in a spot that I think really would mess up that car usually. I think all that happened was William Byron made a really late block. It was a really late block, and it forced Keselowski to lift, or else Keselowski was going to wreck Byron. So I don't understand why Stenhouse got the hate for that. But let's move on to the second incident, which this one was all Stenhouse. Another huge wreck came just a few laps later after the next restart. Byron was racing for the lead. Kyle Busch was to his outside trying to side draft with William Byron. Stenhouse was there on the inside lane and he just drifted up and just took out Kyle Busch and also therefore took out William Byron. Both of them wrecked. Some other guys went spinning. Eric Jones actually suffered a little bit of damage in this incident, but yeah, that one was all in Stenhouse. Don't know what he was doing. He was aggressively side drafting. You know, it's early in the race, still stage 2. It was unnecessary for him to be doing what he was doing. That being said, I think the car probably just got tight on him. It was just a bad judgment call, honestly, on Stenhouse's part. So for that incident and that incident alone, Stenhouse deserves 100% of the blame, and it's fair to criticize him a little bit. But I think a lot of people looked at, he was sort of involved in the first big wreck that took out a lot of fan favorites, and then, he was involved, in the second wreck, obviously, which took out a couple other fan favorites, and I think at that point people were fed up with Stenhouse. Myself included, he deserves plenty of blame, but I think a lot of people kind of piled it on him more so than was necessarily deserving. Kyle Petty, after the race, bluntly said that Stenhouse caused 3 big wrecks and wrecked a lot of cars tonight. Basically said exactly like that. And that's just blatantly untrue. I mean, I don't have a lot of respect for Kyle Petty's racing opinions, but that's a whole episode for another time. But that's just blatantly untrue to say that Stenhouse wrecked a whole bunch of cars tonight. There were so many other factors. You can't just make that blatant statement and not back it up, because you really couldn't in this case. Stenhouse was 100% to blame for wrecking Kyle Busch and William Byron. I would say he was maybe 10% to blame for wrecking that first big wreck that involved Byron and Keselowski. I don't know why people seem to think that was all on Stenhouse. I know because he hit Keselowski, but Keselowski only got hit because Byron shut his door on him. Anyway, Stenhouse didn't suffer that much damage in either of these incidents. Later on, he cut a tire after making contact with Almirola and wrecked. That's just is what it is. Didn't really cost anybody else to have too bad of a day. It was just on Stenhouse. So he had a really rough night, I gotta say. I don't want to spend this whole episode talking about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He's 17th in points with no wins. He doesn't deserve a whole episode about him. But I just wanted to get out here and tell you guys that I didn't think it was fair. Dale Jr. during the broadcast kept kind of hinting that Stenhouse was making a lot of mistakes, especially in that first wreck. And I didn't agree with Dale Jr. there. I don't know why so much of the blame he was putting on Stenhouse. I mean, you guys have seen the wreck yourselves probably by this point. But I still think William Byron is probably the most to blame. You know, and I'm not going to blame William Byron too bad either here. I think it's just a racing deal where everyone's kind of going for the same bit of real estate. It was a bad timing issue. But everyone's acting like that was all Stenhouse. Stenhouse deserves all the blame for wrecking Kyle Busch and William Byron, but I don't understand why people are so upset with Stenhouse for the first wreck. I think it was an unfair criticism, okay? I want to take a minute here and just talk about the race itself. There was a lot of big crashes. I thought the racing was phenomenal when they were able to get green flag runs going. The pack racing, the way the draft worked, this package is phenomenal. Best they've had in a long, long time. In years past, we've seen how it can be extremely difficult to pass the leader. Not so much this season with our current restrictor plate package, especially Saturday night. The leader was never safe. And that's, I think, the way it should be. You don't want the leader to just have that clean air and just easily be able to block two lanes. Like, that's not fun to watch. You want him to actually have to fight to hold that position. And Saturday night, they did. So racing was great, but I know a lot of people criticized the Daytona 500 earlier this year for having several pretty big crashes. And like I said at the top of this show, Saturday night's race at Daytona had several huge crashes. And so I know a lot of people are going to criticize it and say like, oh, plate racing isn't real racing. You know, these crashes aren't what NASCAR is supposed to be about. I feel really bad for all the teams wrecking their cars, blah, blah, blah. Race was great. Obviously, the wrecks were a little excessive, and I'm not going to deny that. I'm the guy that's not afraid to say that I like a couple wrecks here and there. I think they spice the race up, make things more exciting, and I'm not ashamed to say that. But I'll be honest, this race definitely had more wrecks than it needed. People are saying the culture of plate racing needs to change, the package needs to change, maybe we shouldn't race these tracks the way we race them. All these things need to change. And I just want to sit here and say that they're not focusing on the real problem. They think the problem with this weekend's race was the aero package, was the style of racing. That's what they think the problem was. The problem this weekend, and the reason there were a lot of big wrecks, is because we got a lot of really young and really inexperienced drivers on this racetrack. Let's look again at that first big one that I've been talking about. You know, the one where William Byron, a rookie driver, makes a very late and questionable block on Brad Keselowski, which kind of sparks the stack up and causes the big wreck. William Byron's a rookie driver. He's 20 years old. I'm 20 years old. You're gonna seriously tell me you trust me out there driving 200 miles an hour? I don't think so. I get that William Byron's really talented, but he's just not experienced, you know? Let's take a look at the second big wreck, the one where Stenhouse just ran out of talent. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is okay. He's won at these plate tracks before, but he's still a pretty inexperienced driver. He's only been racing, what, this is his 6th year? So he's still a relatively inexperienced driver. Another big one happened later in the race, towards the back of the pack, when Joey Gase just got sideways and wrecked up into Michael McDowell and Eric Almirola. Joey Gase is like 24 years old. He's never raced a full season in the Cup Series. Not a lot of experience there, and the car just took off on him, and he caused that big wreck. Or how about let's fast forward to overtime, when another big wreck happened where we saw Clint Bowyer get turned into the outside wall. Who turned him and started that big wreck? Darrell Wallace Jr., another inexperienced rookie. A common trend here where 4 of the biggest crashes were all started by young drivers with relatively little experience. Kevin Harvick wasn't causing those wrecks. Martin Truex Jr. wasn't causing those wrecks. Kyle Busch didn't cause any of those wrecks. The veterans, for the most part, had their hands pretty clean, but the rookies, William Byron, Bubba Wallace, and then the relatively inexperienced drivers on bad teams like Joey Gase and Ricky Stenhouse Jr., they were the ones causing the big wrecks. So people can say that, oh, the package needs to change, plate racing needs to change. No, no, no. This is just another consequence of having a ton of young, inexperienced drivers take the seats of established veteran drivers. I don't think Matt Kenseth would have wrecked Kyle Busch and William Byron. I don't think Eric Almirola would have hooked Clint Bowyer into the outside wall. I'm not trying to sit here and put these guys on blast. I get they're all really young drivers and they all have a lot of talent. I mean, William Byron was racing for the lead for most of the race. So clearly they have some skill and they're very talented, and I'm not trying to refute that, but I'm just saying they are inexperienced, and we've seen even some experienced drivers make dumb mistakes at Daytona and Talladega. So I just think these wrecks that everyone wants to say are horrible and are you know, the result of bad types of racing are really the results of just inexperienced drivers. And that will slowly change as, you know, the years go on. These inexperienced drivers will get more experienced, and I think we'll have less of these big crashes. So enough with plate racing needs to change. This isn't racing. Focus instead on the real culprits and the real reasons these wrecks happened. And that's just inexperienced drivers. I know this is a really long episode, especially by my recent standards, but it's finally time, I think, to talk about the race winner. And boy, I got a lot to say. Eric Jones from Byron, Michigan, 22 years old, got his first career NASCAR Cup Series win this weekend at Daytona in dramatic overtime, thrilling fashion. He had to beat his former teammate Martin Truex Jr. for the win. Took him a year and a half, or what, about halfway through this year, so it took him a year and a half to get this win. And of course, he did it on the biggest stage of NASCAR stock car racing. Anytime you win at Daytona, it's a big deal. Whether it be February or July, people remember these races. Erik Jones has mostly disappointed me this season. He's had one or two races where he looked like a real top 5 contender, and since he's driving a car that, won at the end of last season and made the playoffs and looked pretty solid in the playoffs, I was a little disappointed with how Jones had been running this year. But he'd been turning things around the last couple weeks. He'd finished top 10 in the last 2 races, and now he'd come in here to Daytona, riding some momentum. I didn't really have him on the radar this weekend for Daytona. Didn't really think of him as a top plate racer and maybe one of the best picks. But at the end of the day, it's Daytona. How much skill do you really need to win one of these races? Let's just look at history. But Erik Jones winning at Daytona here goes beyond just him and his friends and his team and all that. It's also really big for NASCAR as a sport because we've seen how so many veterans have left the last few years. So many young drivers like Jones have filled their shoes, or at least tried to, and for the most part failed to live up to it. Could this be the first breakthrough moment where we'll look back and say that was the race that the next generation of NASCAR drivers took the reins? I might be getting ahead of myself, but Erik Jones is driving a pretty good race car. We've seen how Kyle Larson has been really close to winning this year, and he's one of the top young drivers. We've seen Ryan Blaney run up front driving for a really good team. We got some top young drivers over at Hendrick Motorsports. Bubba Wallace almost won the Daytona 500. We've got some some good young drivers slowly making their way up, and it's not super unreasonable to think that they could win some more races this year as an overall young driver unit. People kept asking me this year, is Erik Jones going to win this year? Is Erik Jones going to win this year? And I've been saying, yeah, I think he's probably going to win this year. I was starting to doubt myself a few weeks ago, but he's turned things around the last couple weeks, and I think Jones is, he looked like a playoff driver before. Now with the win, he's locked in basically. He's a guy that can make it to the round of 8, guys. Don't be shocked. Now this race win wasn't without, its fair share of adversity. Jones didn't have a great qualifying start. He started 29th, had to work his way up through the field. Dodged the first big wreck somehow. Then later was up running in the top 5, and then when Stenhouse wrecked Kyle Busch and William Byron, Jones actually got clipped by Byron's car and totally tore up the right rear on that 20. He had to pit and actually fell a lap down repairing that damage. So then he spent the rest of stage 2 and a large portion of stage 3 a lap down, but he finally got his lap back after, a string of yellows, and from there raced his way up to the front, and yeah, he just took that win on the final restart despite having no drafting help at the start. He was able to make it work, put some good blocks, get a great push from Chris Buescher and AJ Allmendinger to get to the race lead and beat Martin Truex Jr. It was a thrilling couple of laps, at least for me as a guy who has kind of adopted Jones as one of my new favorite drivers. I'm a big Kenseth fan, clearly, and seeing Jones take over his ride, I think he's a worthy successor to Kenseth. I think he's got a really bright career. I was disappointed at first, but I still like Erik Jones. I've really enjoyed rooting for him. So for at least me personally, and for a lot of Matt Kenseth, maybe now Erik Jones fans, I hope that this gives them a guy to really pull for and root for going forward, because I think Jones has a lot of potential. I think he's a future champion. I think he's a future Hall of Famer. I know he's 22 and it's early for me to be saying these things, but as long as he's got an opportunity with a good team like JGR, and as long as he wins races here and there and makes the most of it, Jones is going to be a great driver one day, and he's going to have a great career. I've been saying that, though. This isn't anything new, but I'm glad he finally got a win to kind of back me up here and make me not look like I'm just talking out of nowhere. I'm really excited for Erik Jones, and I hope this bodes well for the sport of NASCAR, because we need to see these young drivers succeed, and I hope Erik Jones is just the first of many to have some great runs this year. Last thing I want to talk about before I let you guys go. Thank you for making it this far. I don't make these episodes this long usually these days, but thank you guys for sticking with me. I want to look at some of the notable finishers. Let's look at the top 20 results there, and you'll see a lot of, maybe new faces, different faces up in the top 20 that you don't usually see. Teammates AJ Allmendinger and Chris Buescher both get top 5s. They were really helpful in getting Erik Jones to the lead on that final restart, so good to see them have a good day. Casey Kane led some laps there in 4th. Not a bad day at all for that team. This was an important race for them, though, as Kane is back around 28th in points. Not going to make the playoffs at this rate unless he gets a win, and I'm sure they're thrilled with a 4th place, but man, they really needed to get that win, and they came up just short of doing so, but still a good run. Ty Dillon there in 6th gets his first career top 10 finish. It took a year and a half for Jones to get a win. It's taken Ty Dillon a year and a half to get a top 10. But hey, we knew it was coming, and you gotta still celebrate it. It's been a long time coming for that 13 car, and that's a small team, not a great team that he's driving, not a great car he's racing, but still. Good day for Ty Dillon, and he deserves to be acknowledged for it. Couple RCR cars there in the top 10. Matt DiBenedetto with a top 10 finish, one of the more underrated drivers, as most people would agree with me there. Alex Bowman was my pick to win this race. Top 10 still. He had to, he was caught up. He was able to dodge most of the big wrecks, but he had a little bit of damage here and there. Still, top 10, not too bad. It's typical Alex Bowman. Runs around 10th to 15th, and at the end of the day, that's where he finishes. Very consistent, man. At the end of the day, Martin Truex Jr. up there in 2nd was the only big 3 driver to really survive the carnage. Harvick Eric was involved in a wreck. You see him further down there. Kyle Busch was obviously involved in a wreck much earlier. I don't know where he finished. He DNF'd. So a really interesting day, and it'll be interesting to see how the points shake up, if this really plays that big of a factor. I know Bowman needed a good day, and so he got that. Stenhouse finishing down there, 17th place. Obviously not indicative of how fast his car was, but given how many incidents he was a part of, still not a terrible finish. Plus he had all those bonus points for winning 2 stages. So a good points day nonetheless for Stenhouse. But yeah, that's your top 20, and those are just my brief thoughts. So that is the end of today's episode of Out of the Groove. Thank you guys for sticking with me throughout it. Share this episode with your friends. Thank you guys so much for your support. Thanks, of course, to Michael Harrison and the rest of our Patreon sponsors. You too can sponsor this show and keep things on a roll over here. For just $5 a month, you can have your name on every single show and get access to behind-the-scenes photos and information. So thank you guys so much for checking that out. Links down below. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram. The EE Cup Series Tournament of Champions will be out Tuesday, just a couple days away. I was hoping to have it up this weekend, had a brief delay there, but it will be up Tuesday of this week, so just a couple days. So get ready for that, get excited. God, this was a great race. Really excited for Eric Jones to get that first win. That's really awesome, and to do it at Daytona of all places, that's pretty outstanding. So thanks everyone for watching. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys again very soon. Have a good one, everyone.